My name is Malcolm Fleming, the Deputy Chair of the New Zealand Construction Industry Council. The NZCIC is the peak body of the New Zealand construction industry, whose membership is comprised of 35 construction associations. For the 2020 election, we took the opportunity to develop this list of 6 election platforms that represented the key opportunities and threats that were facing the New Zealand construction industry. We sent the NZCIC election platforms to the building and construction spokesperson for each of the 5 main political parties and invited them to participate in a recorded interview with Radio New Zealand journalist Phil Pennington. Those conversations included each politician being provided with 2 minutes to articulate their party's overarching building and construction policy, following which Phil asked them questions pertaining to the NZCIC election platforms. The result is 5 separate videos, 1 per political party. As the editing is light, the recordings come across as a conversation, with Phil's follow-up questions changing to follow the thread of the politician's answer to Phil's main election platform question. Whether you watch the full series of 5 or only watch those of parties that you're more aligned with, we hope you find that the material informative. The NZCIC would like to acknowledge the assistance of Radio New Zealand in creating this series.
So thanks for having me today. Look, the key thing for me in the building construction space is around growing that productivity, and especially given we're in a post-COVID environment. The construction sector has a massive role to play in that, but at the moment there's a bit of red tape in the way, and that's one of the key issues I'm hearing consistently around the country is we need to do better in that space. So we need to streamline the regulations. So in terms of the consenting process in particular. So we're overhauling the RMA to create 2 new documents. This is something we've been passionate about for a few years. That's going to be a key part of actually enabling the sector to get on and do the work earlier, rather than just being stuck with cost and time delays before you can even get underway. So that's one of the big areas. Having the ability to get on and do the work, knowing what the work looks like, having a pipeline of work to then give confidence to businesses around investing in staff, investing in assets, other equipment, that's a vital aspect too. So that's why we've come out with a major infrastructure program of work for the next couple of decades to give some clarity around what that might look like and how the sector might fit within that as well. So those are a couple of the biggies, but growing the economy is absolutely essential as we look to try and recover from this devastating situation we found ourselves in. And just yesterday, minus 12% GDP, that's a massive hit. Those figures coming out, and it's looking pretty dire ahead. So there's a number of industries that have a critical role to play. Construction is absolutely one of those.
On the construction industry accord, do you support it much as it is? Does it need to change?
Yeah, look, I think there's been a fantastic amount of work go into that from government actually and industry as well. So I'd really like to congratulate industry for getting on board with that, for helping to guide some focused cohesion around that from the government perspective as well, getting them on the same page and having a bit of a plan. So I think that's a fantastic piece of work that's been done. So I'd absolutely want to continue working alongside that. Evolving it a little bit, but actually the reality is it's covering a lot of key areas there. But of course, it's the implementation. That's what matters. And so we need to see a strong ongoing commitment from government, but also from industry players as well. One area that I would like to see a little bit more focus on within the construction sector accord would be in the prefab space. Transportable, modular, prefab construction. There's not really any mention of that in the construction sector accord, and I think that's got an important part to play in our future.
In terms of government as procurer, it's got a lot of money to spend. What do you intend to do to address and improve the risk transfer that's been happening, that's been damaging the industry? What needs to happen there? What do you intend to happen there to cut down and to improve that risk transfer?
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges that I think is leading to a lot of the delays in the process we have. And also alongside those delays is, in some cases, a requirement for potentially excessive engineering or overdoing it really. And I think that is largely driven by the fact that liability is on everyone's mind. Where does that risk sit? Who ends up holding the can if things go wrong? And what we've seen in the past is that effectively falls back onto the territorial authorities, the local councils. And so that's a real issue around how do we enable them to make decisions that are delivering outcomes that are appropriate and in an appropriate time frame that therefore help to avoid an increase in cost.
Would National intend to change the liability settings then?
We're looking at how we can give confidence to those building consenting authorities to be able to make decisions that deliver the right outcomes whilst managing their risk as well. Of course, you've got to be mindful that we're underpinned by a joint and several liability system in New Zealand, so that has to be a key consideration in this as well. So we can't just say, well, we're going to cap liability for any particular participant at a certain percentage. It's not quite as simple as that, but that's certainly where we're looking to say, well, hey, how do we give confidence so that they can, and there's different insurance models potentially within that as well, but really we're looking to try and improve the efficiency, and at the moment it's being held up because of that risk and liability situation.
You don't intend to try and revisit changing the joint and several approach that's locked in, is it?
No, look, I think that would be a pretty bold position to try and change our fundamental legal views on some of these things. So no, I'm not suggesting that, but the reality is that we do need to change or refine it slightly so that we can have more confidence within the industry there.
The base contract NZS 3910 is this big, and then other contracts have been produced that are just getting bigger and bigger, including government contracts. What would you intend to do to resource the streamlining of that contract? It's being worked on now, but a lot of that load is falling on the industry. So what do you intend the government to do to resource NZS 3910 and get it fit for purpose?
I haven't seen the detail of where I've got to with that, but again, it's about trying to improve the efficiency so that you can get on and do it. The challenge is with a lot of these things that the complexity, the bureaucracy that goes around it ends up excluding a lot of participants from the industry, right? Unless you're a larger scale, medium to large scale operator, it can be too time consuming, too costly, just too hard to do business. And that's a fundamental problem. We need to address that so that actually all participants can get on and play a critical role in driving our efficiency. The contra to that, of course, is that you've got to have confidence that you're outlining appropriate responsibilities and that there's no, the system has to be adhered to in terms of the requirements of contracts, etc. Costs have to be managed within that. There are always risks of exploitation. So it's a balancing act as with any contract situation, of course, but at the moment, I've heard from a number of industry players, it's just too complex to get into for the small operators.
Would you broaden the building levy to resource that type of streamlining?
Yeah, look, there's a significant fund there, $55 odd million of surplus building levy at the moment that absolutely can be repurposed to assist within a number of areas. Streamlining that certainly would be one consideration. Giving confidence to other types of construction methods, different processes, creating clearer rules or systems around how we implement or bring in the likes of your transportable or modular construction. And I appreciate there's a bill going through Parliament at the moment, but that levy can certainly be better purposed than just sitting there and actually a reduction in levy over time to see that dwindle away. I'm not hearing that that's a strong desire from the sector. Actually, I think most people are reasonably comfortable where the levy was if it's been utilised better. And so I think that can certainly be utilised better for some of those other initiatives.
Industry protection, particularly retentions, is there a problem? Do you have a plan to meet it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really tough one. And of course, you feel for any business that's going under, but so often it's those subbies that are the ones that are getting impacted, those further down the stream who actually end up with a lot of hurt as well, through effectively no fault of their own. And that's the real issue that needs to be addressed with the retentions. And you hear stories pop up in the media every now and again of it, even just, Joe Blogs tradie who's not able to get on site and access tools, So one, they're lost out on this job, but actually they can't even get their gear to then go to somewhere else. So those absolutely need to be addressed. The retentions aspect, more visibility around that, I think, is helpful to give a bit of confidence. But actually we need to be addressing right down to those, down to the weeds, I suppose, in that regard, to give a bit more certainty. And again, you can't expect owner-operators or one-man bands or small businesses with only a couple of staff to be going out and looking at all sorts of different security instruments to protect their individual assets, as it were, on any particular job. We've got to be able to provide a better solution than that.
Okay, in the area of regulation, would you be aiming to bring in mandatory third-party certification of building products?
I think, again, look, it's about trying to create some confidence, isn't it? Give some certainty around how people use particular products. I think having a centralised approach to that wouldn't be bad. And so, in that regard, we are seeing a significant change in the availability of different products, and the cost of those coming into the country. They can obviously provide an enticing solution for some people, but we've got to be able to give confidence that we don't end up with situations where 5-10 years down the track these products are failing, and whether that's through the use of the product themselves or the method in which they've been incorporated into the construction system. Those aspects absolutely need to be identified clearly at the start, but at the same time, we don't want to be just bringing in additional regulation and bureaucracy, because there is far too much red tape already within the system.
So what do you do? Because I think you grimaced when I used the word mandatory. You don't want a mandatory third-party certification system. What do you want?
Well, no, I'm not saying we rule that out, but what I'm saying is actually we need to have a bit more of a look at how that fits within the broader scheme, and exactly what that might look like.
Modern methods of construction, you're a fan from what you said before?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely a space for it, and it's not going to be the solution for everyone, and that's absolutely fine. There should be variety. We have increasing technology coming into the industry. There's some really innovative solutions out there, and I think it's an exciting space that I really would like to see a bit more focus on. And again, the ability for them to deliver is being hamstrung by the red tape and regulations in place. So we need to be running a ruler over that one quite promptly after the election. That would be my intent, to get straight into that, have a look at how we can streamline it to enable much more rapid deployment of some of those solutions.
Do you have a plan or policy at the moment? Because you've got regulation which you want to streamline, but you need quality as well. We talked before about council liability. They don't want a bunch of houses, modular houses built in China that don't perform. So what is the plan on that front?
Yeah, that's right. And so part of the challenge as well is that if you have a particular modular component, it might be fine for one purpose, but not for another purpose if you're incorporating it with numerous other products, for example, and different construction methods, if you're talking multiple story units or whatever it may be. And so again, you've got to be mindful that you don't want to say, well, every unit must adhere to a particular standard if they're not all going to be used for that. But particularly bringing in new stuff from offshore is a real challenge that we need to manage. But at the same time, just domestically, when we look at some of the capacity we have here, there's unnecessary regulation around that. So we don't have a clear set of rules that specifically say this is how we can deliver some of those new methods of construction in a factory setting, potentially, whatever it may be. We just need to streamline that a bit better to acknowledge that actually there are some quite clear differences between what have been traditional construction methods out on site versus bringing in modular or transportable or prefab systems
Right. How does your party envisage using government procurement to encourage MMC, modern methods of construction? For instance, would you get kind of order to buy modular state houses?
Well, that's absolutely an option. And at the moment, there is still a significant need for an increase in housing. There's still a real demand out there in a number of different areas around the country. So looking at innovative solutions would absolutely be part of that. So the expectation would be that actually Kāinga Ora are looking at a range of options. In some cases, these will be appropriate, and in some they may not. And so that's where, again, yeah, as with all of these things, it's no simple answer in terms of what would or wouldn't happen. It's a matter of getting a combination of solutions. You know, you've got to be mindful as well. You don't want to just end up with potential for slum areas as they've been reported in the media. Or, you know, you've really got to have a mixed model where you have a range of different housing options within there. But these modern methods of construction are absolutely an important part of the future for New Zealand.
I feel like people capacity and capability, there's been a big overhaul of vocational training. If you're in power, are you going to keep that framework, the overhaul framework in place, or are you going to change it?
Yeah, look, the training of a new workforce is absolutely vital. These issues, well, we have some issues with the review of vocational education. The key concern really is around the centralisation that we're seeing. And look, we're fortunate in my own area of the Waikato, where we will see the home of the NZICIC based here, and that's great for this region. But actually, when we look at the specific variability and regional skill requirements, we've got to be absolutely focused on that. And that is one of our concerns, is that how do you ensure that you still retain that local flavour, that local set of skills and knowledge that's appropriate for a particular region, and that varies as you go around the country. And so that is one of the key concerns around Rogue, is actually being able to deliver what's needed by the industry, because you can't just have an institution delivering the right outcomes for the construction sector. It's got to be led by industry players with actual practical lived experience on the job. These trainees have to be out there doing it day in, day out. So that would be one key area that we really need to, or that I want to highlight, is that we need to keep that focus very much locally and in the relevant spaces for those particular areas.
So would you be ordering a review of that framework?
Well, we've already signalled that we have some concerns with the vocational education space, and our tertiary education spokesperson can talk in more detail on that. But effectively, yeah, we're not entirely happy with what's been proposed by the government under the review of vocational education, and we'll be making a few changes in that space.
Do you have any ideas yourself in terms of encouraging more apprenticeships?
A growing workforce is vital. So we need to be getting, at the moment we're seeing tens of thousands of New Zealanders losing jobs, and being able to retrain is going to be a vital part of our speed of recovery. So that's one of our fundamental pillars. One of our 5 key pillars that we're going through this campaign on is around retraining that workforce, getting the right skills in place and bringing people into apprenticeships as a key part of that. I think we can look back over the last few decades and say, well, actually, we haven't quite had enough people coming into the trades, and we need to do better in that space. That's something I'm pretty passionate about, and education is a hugely important area. And for some people, that's tertiary education, going off to a university and getting a degree, and that's great, but that's not for everyone. Actually, getting a trade is a very worthwhile role and an incredibly important one, especially as we look at trying to recover from a challenge like COVID-19. You know, that will be driven largely by industries such as construction, primary industries as well, but the construction sector has a massive role to play in driving our recovery. Got to be able to give employers confidence that they see a future for themselves in the industry, that there is enough work, that there is enough certainty and support to actually take those decisions to expand their workforce, to take on a new apprentice. And so we've got to be giving clearer signals, which is why we've come out with some pretty bold infrastructure and economic plans to help try and give that confidence to the sector.
About the COVID recovery, sometimes it seems it's a competition who can promise the most money, throw at infrastructure. How's the public to gauge your plan, your policy around that in comparison to Labor? For instance, what are you imagining will happen with vertical? Vertical spending like the poor second cousin here. So what are you suggesting about vertical construction?
Yeah, so look, we have seen a massive, eye-watering large contributions to the post-COVID recovery. And infrastructure, of course, plays a massive part of that. We've identified that early. Actually, we had some pretty ambitious plans in place even before COVID. But the reality is now that that sort of economic activity is absolutely critical. One, because it creates jobs straight away when you're able to get on and do those projects. So you've got a significant workforce working on those projects. And then once the projects are complete, it's driving new economic activity in whatever area it is. So if it's horizontal infrastructure, well, that's great, because you're increasing or facilitating transportation or access, greater connectivity, whatever method you look at that as, whether it's transportation or internet, for example. And that stuff then helps to grow the economy as well. But in terms of vertical infrastructure as well, that's going to be another key area where we need to be giving certainty, which comes back to what I mentioned right at the start around streamlining that process, right? So overhauling the RMA, getting that fit for purpose is not currently able to be amended, I don't think, in its current form. And we've said we're just totally starting from scratch again there. And again, looking at how the consenting situation works through the BCAs at the moment. Again, it's slow, it's clunky. So, and you've got to have better consistency across the different territorial authorities. So those are a couple of key areas where if we can get those settings right, that helps to give a lot more confidence then that you can get on and do the work. And so those vertical construction projects as well will start to kick off more in that space. But at the same time, we've seen a bit of a drop in consent numbers too. And so when we look to the future over the next 12 months, there will still be a lot of hurt out there. And we see already in a number of towns where commercial premises are starting to be vacated by some who are saying, well, actually, we work pretty well through COVID from home. Maybe we don't need a retail presence because of the cost of that, or actually businesses who just haven't been able to survive COVID-19 and so are vacating those commercial premises. So the question, there's still a bit of a question mark around how much demand there will be for that over the next few years. But at the same time, you've got areas, Hamilton City is an example where there is significant growth going on. The CBD, there's some pretty ambitious plans from a number of private players there around how to grow that. And it needs a more cohesive and supportive regulatory environment again.
Do you imagine to give putting more money into councils or into retrofitting or maintenance schools and hospitals?
Big one we're hearing, and it's in the media at the moment as well, is around the water management. How do we actually support the infrastructure out there at the moment? All right, so typically a local government function to manage water, but we are seeing a lot of pressure on some of those systems, especially in our larger urban centres. They're probably the ones people would have seen the most about in the media. And so getting that infrastructure up to standard is absolutely critical. There's far too much water, drinking water lost through the system, wastewater spillages during storm events, etc. So those sorts of issues need to be addressed. That's a council responsibility, but at the same time, we need to be ensuring it happens. And when a lot of councils are saying they're at debt ceilings, then we need to be looking at different mechanisms for that. So that's partly why we've come up with the National Infrastructure Bank that we're rolling out, which will help to drive some innovative solutions, different funding models to enable the work to be done, and bringing in potentially different private players, different investment groups who might then look to get their return by investing in a particular project here, which helps us, of course, by getting that infrastructure without necessarily impacting on the balance sheets of local councils or even central government.
Any initiatives in field of trying to move the industry further away from low ball, the race to the bottom type model?
Well, yes, I mean, it's an issue that's been raised. At the same time, the industry or market-led solutions, government can't play in every space. And I think there needs to be a bit of a conversation around what people are comfortable pricing at. And some of those arguments at the moment, as you say, race to the bottom, it's challenging. That is the nature of a competitive environment as well. But at the same time, there is a role from government when you look at, we are one of the pretty major players in terms of the construction sector. And so it comes back to what we mentioned earlier on around the contracting process as well, and being able to give a bit more clarity and certainty in that space.
Construction policy settings around climate change. The world will be warmer in 2023 than it is now. So what are policy settings on that front?
Having a greener future is absolutely vital, and that's one of the other 5 pillars within our approach through this campaign as well, is that actually we need to be looking at smarter solutions. Reducing construction waste is a big part of that. And again, there's some interesting options available when you look at some of the stats around the waste through the modular construction process, significantly reduced from those prefab operators. Some of that is an important area as well. Repurposing slightly different building products. Those are all things that we're looking at, but in terms of having core procurement policies based around that, we don't have any set initiatives at this stage on that.